The world's major energy players gather in Doha to talk about the future of oil. Are we stuck with high energy prices? And will there be enough to meet global demand years from now? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. And for the first time in its history, the Middle East is hosting the World Petroleum Congress. The 5,000 participants are gathering in Qatar's capital, Doha, to talk about the most pressing issues facing the energy sector today. Last held in Madrid in 2008, much has changed since then. And with the Middle East undergoing a wave of political upheaval, the Emir of Qatar was quick to reassure the world's biggest consumers that energy supplies will continue to come. Well, despite the global downturn, the demand for energy is on the up, particularly for oil. So who are the world's biggest consumers? Topping the list is the United States, using almost 20 million barrels a day. China requires over 8 million barrels a day. Japan needs over 4 million barrels, while India and Russia use almost 3 million barrels a day. Those are among the biggest consumers in the world. We'll be talking about all that and a whole lot more, we hope. For more on this are our three guests. In Doha, we have Dr. Ibrahim, Economic Advisor to His Highness, the Emir of Qatar. And also in Doha at the conference venue, John Clark joins us. He's an oil and gas analyst for Ernst & Young. And in Dubai, we have Saadallah El-Fathi, an energy analyst and former head of the Energy Studies Department at OPEC. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Dr. Ibrahim, if I could start with you. What are some of the main challenges facing big energy producers like Qatar at this Congress?
Well, actually, the theme of the conference was that energy cannot be discussed in separation of other factors. Energy is interrelated to many issues, and now it's getting even more. It's interrelated to economic growth in developed countries. It's interrelated to economic development in developing countries. It's interrelated to environment. And also, there is a great degree of interdependence between the main players, the consumers, the producers, and the international and national oil companies.
Particularly significant as well, Dr. Ibrahim, that this conference this time around is being held here in Qatar. Is that a recognition of the country's future role in global energy supplies and the role that it will play years from now?
Well, definitely it is, but in His Highness speech we talked about that about time it will be held in the Middle East, because the Middle East really is, you can say, is the heart of the energy industry. It has about 54% of the oil reserve in the world, and it has about 40% of the gas reserve in the world. It is a recognition of the importance of this area, and also I think it's a recognition of the important role that Qatar plays in the world energy.
John Clark, a lot of big players in the energy industry at that conference where you are, government officials, oil producers and analysts like yourself. What are the main issues that you have been talking to among people there so far?
Well, I don't think you should just look at this as issues. I think you should look at it as opportunities. This is a hugely global event. I mean, stood on the Ernst & Young stand here, if you look to your right, we've got the South African National Oil Company. Across the way, we've got one of the Chinese national oil companies. There's a great representation from the Middle East, and I think the thing that this event is doing is connecting those producers and those consumers from around the world. And if we can make more of those connections, I think we'll see a more stable oil and gas environment going forward. Historically, supply has been concentrated in too few countries. Demand has tended to be concentrated in a small number of countries. That's led to massive volatility in the price of the commodity. But as we globalise, I think we will see a much more stable and more attractive environment. And we're viewing this conference as a theme around opportunities rather than around issues.
You talk about the volatility there and the need for further stability and demand perhaps to pick up elsewhere. What are the areas where you see that changing then?
Well, I think if you look at the market at the moment, it's very finely balanced between supply and demand. And even though demand has fallen off a little bit during the global financial crisis, supply falls off very quickly in the world of oil and gas if you don't invest, because production declines. That's just a natural phenomenon. So investment is needed just to maintain production at current levels. And what we're talking about today is actually investment to grow production, and to grow it not just here in the Middle East but in other areas of the world. There's been tremendous growth in the US, growth in production potential in China, Australia, and through much of Asia is also a huge amount of potential. And I think if we roll forward to the next World Petroleum Congress in 3 years' time, which is actually in Russia, interestingly enough, we will see a very different oil and gas landscape again. But most of the investment decisions that people are making are for 20, 25 years, and to make those investment decisions with confidence, you need to have a reasonable view of what the price of the commodity is going to be, not just tomorrow or next year, but in 20 or 25 years' time. And that stability is hugely important for this industry.
Saadallah Al-Fathi in Dubai, I want to get your view on this, and I want to ask you about the announcement on Monday of this oil pipeline that extends from the eastern coast of the United Arab Emirates, the announcement that this is nearly complete. What is this good news for the stability of the energy sector? Because basically what this does is it bypasses the Strait of Hormuz, which of course Iran figures into that. So essentially you're bypassing Iran. How important is that for the current stability of the energy sector?
Well, I think the pipeline will provide an alternative route for the exports of the United Arab Emirates. Its size is tremendous at around 1.8 million barrels a day. So you can say the majority of oil exports from the United Arab Emirates can go that way. It is strategic indeed. And at the same time, it could also make some economy, because it's going to save on journey time for tankers. It goes to an already deep port, which has been in existence for a long time. And it does avoid the geostrategic problems that this area of the world is always engulfed to.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about Iran now, since that is, of course, one of the main issues that is dominating the energy sector at the moment. It's certainly dominating oil prices, which have gone up to $100 a barrel again on Monday. But I want to show you the comments from Iran's the spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, rather. He has warned that any move to block its oil exports would more than double crude prices, with devastating consequences on a fragile global economy. He said as soon as such an issue is raised seriously, the oil price would soar to above $250 a barrel. He went on to say imposing sanctions on oil and gas is among the sanctions that, if one wants to do that, the consequences should be fully considered before taking any action. Now, he's talking, of course, about the discussion that's going on right now about the European Union and its intentions to slap an oil embargo on Iran. I want to turn to you on this, John Clark. I know you're not a political analyst, and I know you're looking purely at the economics of this, but what sort of effect could that potentially have here?
Yeah, I don't think my government in the UK would thank me for commenting on sanctions against Iran, but if you take 2 million barrels a day of production out of the market overnight, clearly that is going to impact the market overnight. I think, though, if you look at the longer-term dynamics for the market, and bearing in mind what I've just said about the need for a longer-term view of the commodity price to make longer-term investment decisions, what we see actually is more production coming back on stream in Iraq, new investment here in Qatar, significant growth through parts of Africa, both East Africa, West Africa and North Africa, new projects in Australia. So I think the longer-term impact on the commodity price would be much more muted than the than the overnight impact of taking 1 or 2% of global supply off.
And what if Iran moves on its own terms and imposes an oil embargo on Europe? Is that something that could potentially happen?
Well, I wouldn't sort of know the inner thinking of the Iranian government. I'm not sure that many people.
No, I understand that, but let me put it another way. What potential impact could that have if it does happen?
Well, if supplies into Europe get reduced and the demand remains, then the price will increase. I mean, one thing we saw when supplies were interrupted from Libya over the summer is the price of Brent, which is the reference crude in Europe, shot up considerably. The price of WTI, which is the reference price in the US, didn't rise by anywhere near as much, such that there was a very big differential in the European market. But I come back to what I said before. I think they're more short-term phenomena, and in the medium term and the longer term, I'm quite excited about the range of new projects in the oil and gas industry, that if we can make them happen, we should have a more stable commodity price environment. But it's a simple law of economics. If someone takes a meaningful amount of supply out of the market overnight, it will have a short-term impact on the price.
I want to turn back to Dr. Ibrahim on this, if I can. Obviously, Qatar is a major gas producer in the world. Is gas the future of the energy sector as you see it?
Let me address the issue you just raised before, and I have to interfere on this one. I think it will be a big mistake to impose any embargo on oil exports in Iran for many reasons. Of course, for the devastating effect that it would have in the short term, but in the long term also, it's not a good thing. This violates, actually, it's in total conflict with the theme of this conference, the conference that energy for all, that energy requires cooperation, requires investment, requires innovation. So the spirit of this conference dictates that energy should not be used for political purpose, whether from the oil exporting countries or from the oil importing countries. And if we play that game, I think this is an extremely dangerous game.
Your point is fully taken, but I just want to get back to my original question, if I can, about the Qatar and the fact that it is a major gas producer. Is that where you see the future of the energy sector?
Look, the energy sector, if you look at the energy sector now, you have three main sources of energy. You have oil, you have gas, you have coal. And these represent about 81% of the total energy consumption. So all the things you hear about renewable energy and other things really are maybe in the future, but not in the short and the intermediate term. Gas, of course, is one major source of these three sources, and we believe because of its characteristics, its impact on environment, its importance in electricity, and also now we are actually diversifying means by which you transport gas. So yes, gas would be even more important than it is now. I wouldn't say will be the only source, but it will be, especially now we're talking about shale gas, and this could increase the supply of gas, and with it increase the importance of gas as energy source.
Saadallah Al-Fathi, oil and gas will continue to be with us for some time to come, but with the focus on renewable energy, is that something that nations should focus on much more?
Well, I would agree with Dr. Ibrahim said, that renewable energy is indeed welcome. But let us be clear about it. Its contribution now to the world energy supply is not more than 6–7%. And therefore, even if it multiplies in the short term, every few years, there is a long time before it can catch up with either oil, coal, or gas. So to me, it's an additional factor that will ensure more energy supplies to the world communities, and therefore it's a welcome thing. But first of all, we have to have the cost of renewable energy and the new energies to fall down so that other countries can go into them and use them efficiently to help the supply of the traditional energy sources such as oil, coal, and gas.
John Clark, what's your view on this? Renewable energy is something that everybody's talking about, obviously, in the future, but we will continue to rely on oil and gas for years to come, won't we?
Well, I think the important thing looking to the future is to have as balanced an energy mix as possible, and I agree with your other two speakers that things are not going to change overnight in terms of the world's energy mix. But if you go back 15 or 20 years, gas had a much smaller role than it does today, and clearly gas is a huge part of the economy here in Qatar and for the future of Qatar. I think speaking from the perspective of the UK, where I live and am based, renewables and included within that is nuclear power are taking an increasingly important role in a low carbon economy in the UK, but as one of the other speakers said, it's growing from a relatively low base, so change is not going to happen overnight. But if we don't grab that nettle today and start to make difficult investment decisions, we'll find ourselves in 20 or 30 years' time looking back to 2011 and wishing we may have made some bolder decisions right now.
We talked earlier about the high price of oil and how it's hit $100 a barrel again on Monday. Dr. Ibrahim, if I could turn back to you on this. Obviously, that's something that concerns many of us because it affects everything we do with energy, from the price we pay for the gas we put in our cars and for how much we pay for our heating bills and so on. But are we basically going to have to live with the high price of energy for years to come?
Well, it really depends on what you mean by high price.
I mean things like high gas prices, high energy bills, that sort of thing.
This is a very controversial issue. So what are you comparing it with? Are you comparing it with the price of soft drink? Are you comparing it with what?
I'm comparing it with what the prices were in real terms compared with a couple of years ago, for example.
I think the price of energy went up. Certainly in the last few years. Whether this is the right price or not, it's very difficult to talk about. What we have to worry about, that the price of energy should not affect the economic growth of the world and should not affect developing countries. But even here, as you know, when we talk about developing countries, especially the poor countries, really the issue is not the energy on its own. The issue is really all the development process. And I think it is the duty and it is imperative that the oil exporting countries or the gas exporting countries also and the importing countries, advanced importing countries, work together because this is a common responsibility to make sure that social development, economic development of the world poor countries is achievable. And this is not only by talking about energy, it's also talking about education, about infrastructure, about innovation and transfer of technology. So I think we should work together and make sure that energy is affordable, but at the same time, we have to understand that the cost of sustaining energy in the future is increasing tremendously. Energy used to be in easy areas. Now we are getting, it's true that the supply of oil, for instance, is increasing, but it's increasing from enhanced recovery, increasing from using technology to get oil from shallow wells. It's increasing also from areas where in deep water. So the cost is tremendous, and we are talking about probably the estimate is around maybe 5, 6, some people say $800 billion a year. It will the cost would be to maintain and sustain the growing demand of energy. So all these factors should work together.
All right. John,
and in order to really discuss the price of oil.
John Clark, you were nodding your head to some of that. You agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I think whether the oil price is high, low or medium is all a matter of perspective, but certainly one thing you appreciate immediately when you come to an exhibition like WPC is the global nature of the industry and the complexity of that industry. You know, the future sources of oil and gas are increasingly remote from markets, you know, be they in the Arctic, be they offshore Australia, you know, be they liquefaction of or conversion of gas to liquids here in Qatar. You know, all of these sources of energy, to get them to market requires a significant amount of capital and infrastructure compared to the sort of shallower wells that you might see in Saudi, for example, historically. So you've got to look at the cost of the production of oil and gas and the cost of getting that to market, and you've got to look at the volatility. I think if you were to say the oil price is going to be $100 a barrel for the next 20 years, that would largely be greeted positively because it gives that stability around which people can make planning and investment decisions. But actually over the last 5 years the oil price has been $50 and it's been $150. That navigation of uncertainty and complexity in that sort of environment is much more challenging.
Saadallah Al-Fathi, $100 a barrel of oil for the next 20 years. You see it that way as well?
Well, I don't know. Like my friend said, you know, the prices have been going up and down in a very wide range over a short period of time. This volatility, you know, is really avoiding the stability that everybody seeks, and it is not in our hand, really, not in the hands of the oil producers in order to provide that stability. The instruments that are in the market, especially the futures market, does not contribute to stability. If there is a stability over the long run, the future market will be out of business. So really, I don't know, coming back to the question of whether the price is fair or not, I think if the market gives us $100 a barrel, then the price is fair. Remember, many times OPEC wanted to discuss this with the consumers. Let us discuss oil prices. Let us see what is reasonable for both sides. And the consumers used to refuse utterly any discussion about oil prices, saying that the market is the arbiter between us and you. So OPEC and other producers accepted the market. And the market is giving $100. So I think it is fair. And if it stays for the next 200 years, according to the market, then it is fair. And we have to accept that, I'm afraid.
John Clark, if I could turn to you for the last word on this, perhaps in the couple of minutes or so that we have. Do you see further volatility in the market, just looking at this in a near-term view, or do you think things will eventually stabilize at some point?
I think in the near term we're probably going to see further volatility. All we've talked about over the last 40 minutes or so is specific to the oil and gas industry, and I think you've got some great perspectives, but we can't look at the oil and gas industry in isolation. It's a very volatile capital market out there. There's a lot of issues happening in the Eurozone. You know, there's a presidential election coming up in the US. You know, they've got issues with their debt. You put all of these sort of geopolitical factors into the mix, yes, we're going to get volatility. But I think the outlook for the oil and gas sector is positive. The world is going to continue to need energy, and if we don't invest, oil and gas production is going to decline. Something at the rate of 6% a year, I think, is the global decline rate. So that investment is going to continue to happen, and it's going to happen on a global basis. And it's great for an organisation like Ernst & Young to be a part of making that happen.
Indeed, a lot of factors in play there, and we will certainly be following all of that. But that is it for this edition of Inside Story. I want to thank all three of our guests for joining us, Dr. Ibrahim and John Clark here in Doha, and Saadallah Al-Fathi in Dubai. Many thanks for your time, gentlemen. So as we said, that's it. Thanks for watching. Just before we go, I want to remind you that we'd love to get your comments on this topic and any other for that matter. Just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. There you see the email on screen. I'm Hazem Seeker. Thanks for watching. See you next time.